If I arrived home at 5 p.m. on a Friday with my week's wages, I'd done really, really well. I am fed up. I am drained with gambling. I'm utterly consumed by gambling. I knew it had to happen as well, because like I said, it was going to be prison or death.
Hello and welcome to the Invisible Addiction podcast. If you're a new listener, hi, thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this episode. And of course, if you're a long-time listener of the podcast, I hope you've been keeping well. Shortly, we'll be hearing a gambling addiction story. But before we go any further, I would like to make a short disclaimer and say that this is an informational podcast. If you're experiencing gambling problems, of course, I hope you relate to the stories you hear, but please do seek professional help. Links to that support can be found on the Invisible Addiction website, www.theinvisibleaddiction.com/support. Right, without further ado, let's crack on with the podcast. Okay, so joining us on the other end of the line today is Kieron from Rotherham. He's come onto the podcast to share his gambling addiction story with us and to tell us more about his YouTube channel, Second Chance Addiction. I'd like to find out how Kieron started gambling, when it became a problem, how he stopped gambling, and what help he's received. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce him. Kieron, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, Alex, and thank you for having me on, and hopefully we can, have a good discussion and I can shed some light on my story and my recovery and I'm sure bits along the way to maybe help others as well.
Fantastic. Before we dive into your story, could you give the listeners a quick introduction about your background and experience?
Yeah, so I'm 30 years old. I'm a lorry driver by trade, and I'm from a town in South Yorkshire called Rotherham. It's pretty much a working class town. It's brought up on a council estate, not a lot of money around. The things you hear quite a lot, but ultimately it's where I was made, and as I've grown up over the years, I've had a great work ethic instilled in me. Unfortunately, at the moment, it is what it is with work. That's down to past decisions. But yeah, I wouldn't say I'm anything out of the ordinary in the respect that I was brought up in a typical working class town, and yeah, I'm just a normal lad really who managed to get himself into a lot of difficulty with addiction.
Well, that's a good place to. That's a good transition, I suppose. So, yeah. So, gambling. How did it start for you?
I'm 30 now. Around 8 years old. Well, first I'd point out that I lived and I was brought up with my grandparents, who on my mum's side who like to gamble daily, on the daily 49ers lotto, and the reason I say that it become clearer in a moment, but also on my father's side, I had a grandmother who lived at the seaside, a coastal town where there was arcades, and you can probably see where I'm going with this. But between the two, when I used to go and stay at the seaside with the other grandparent, I'd go for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and I was always given money to go with. But that 2 or 3 weeks would consist of daily visits to the arcade, to play bingo with the grandmother's friends, and again for her, it was a social thing, and same as at home, the lotto, they enjoyed it. They didn't have a problem with gambling, in my opinion, certainly. But what it did do, all those days going in the arcade, not really going to the beach in a coastal town, just seeing it as arcade fun, and what seeing daily lottery slips around the house and going to the shops and seeing them going to the bookmakers, what it did do, is it normalised gambling. from a very, very, very early age. And for me, I don't blame anyone for my addiction, but it certainly, as I say, it became, gambling was normal. And I'm sure it's normal for millions of people, but there was a connection made for me that was unhealthy from a very early age. So when I say that, I'm looking and thinking back to memories of playing bingo. Most people would just play one seat, one card sort of thing. Whereas me, I couldn't just do that. I had to have 2 or 3, maybe 4 seats worth of bingo cards lit up to increase my chances of winning. And I would often be seen dashing around side to side while the numbers are getting called out, probably getting on the bingo caller's nerves because I'm missing numbers and he's having to wait and he can see me dashing around to win tokens, but for prizes, not even for cash. But it was the thrill of the win. It was there was digital bingo cards, there was lit up. So it was the lights. And when I wasn't doing that, I was not tall enough at this point to actually reach the pocket in which you put money into a fruit machine. So what I did is used my, I would like to say common sense, but looking back, it was very much not common sense in bringing a stool or a chair or whatever I could find to climb onto, to stand on, to reach the pocket to put the money in the fruit machine slot. And, at this stage, it was 5p's, 10p's, £1. But still, it was the thrill. I didn't really have a full idea as to how that fruit machine in particular worked. But I knew that through, again, being in the arcade environments, watching other people and family and friends on them, I knew that sort of 777 means a win, or 3 of the same whatever image, character, whatever you want to call it, means a win. The board features just blew my mind. I didn't know what was happening, but it was bright lights, it was flashing, it was making noises, and it was all playing into my sort of, what's the word? I suppose it was all playing into that excitement and anticipation of what could I win here, what could happen. And I would often spend all my spending money for that day and be on the phone to the people who brought me up, my other grandparents, asking for more money. And I remember being, like I said, 8, 9, 10 years old, looking out the window at the seaside for the postman, because but in them days it was a case they would send me money in the post. And I would honestly be sat there some days and he wouldn't arrive, and I remember being very, very disappointed because it meant that we couldn't go to the arcades. And when he did arrive, it was happy days because it was gamble time. And I even remember walking to the arcades, which was probably about 25-minute walk from where I stayed, down a lane, and I had 80p to go in the arcades with, and I walked next to some pebbles in this sort of garden area, and I dropped some money. I dropped it, and I remember finding only 40p of that. But I remember also being there for about half an hour digging around in these pebbles to find the other 40 pence. Because it was more gamble money, gamble tokens. And I remember being gutted that I couldn't find it, and I only had 40p to spend. So the reason I make that point is, even then, even with such little money, even with just a small gamble in my sights, I was feeling the disappointment in when I perhaps didn't have the money, I didn't have enough money to gamble with, or indeed I ran out of money. But also the anticipation in being able to go to the arcades in the first place. Walking, like I said, down a country lane for 25 minutes, with an adult, don't get me wrong, at that age. But, I could have maybe done other things, played football at that stage, but I was more interested in gambling. And again, when we went to pubs, I would be there, but I wouldn't be there because I would be fascinated with watching whoever was on the bandit, the fruit machine. People would try and engage me in conversation about football, which I loved, but I was too interested in watching the person on the bandit. And they're just all signs, looking back now, throwing money at the wall at school in a game that we called Jinx. Whoever's money landed closest to the wall won. I was chucking £10 notes wrapped around a 50 pence with an elastic band, at 11 years old. And looking back now, again, I'm talking about those memories because they was the start. But what they also was is really, for me, looking back and knowing what I know now, it was writing on the wall, right in front of my eyes. And unless I did something about it then, which at that age I didn't, obviously, and there wasn't the awareness that there is starting to be now, I was going to develop a major gambling problem. And as I'm sure we'll talk about, it did progress.
Well, I was going to say, just on that note, how did it progress? Because I guess that's childhood you've spoken about there, but then you turn 18, you turn legal age. Well, I say legal age, actually, you can bet in arcades, which is the preposterous thing in this country. I did a recent vlog. I live down in Portsmouth at Southsea, and there's one of these seaside arcades. And I just found it astonishing that as kids you can bet on Batman themed slot machines, or fruit machines rather, for kids, which is crazy. So that was childhood. So how did it progress when you kind of started to hit legal betting age?
I think there's two sort of aspects to this, in that it progressed because I started to earn money, my own money. It wasn't large amounts, especially my first job, but it was still money coming in, unlike what I'd seen before. So there was money on my hands. But even then, I remember needing the money to pay for the extortionate car insurance on my first car at a young age, which had, again, two sides to that, because one hand, it was money that was spoken for, but on the other hand, it was also a big worry if we couldn't afford it. And the only way, in my mind, even back then, we could get money to afford it some months is if I had a gamble and a win. But the other aspect to how it sort of developed at that age is that I was obviously of the legal age to enter a Bookmakers. And the Bookmakers really was always something that, looking back, it sounds, it's sad really, but it's reality for many, many people, I'm sure, who go on to have problems. But Bookmakers was always like the holy grail. It was like equivalent for me of playing at Old Trafford for Man United in a smaller respect, but still a massive way. Because I was never allowed in. I always had to be outside the window watching people on the machine and trying to poke my head round and watching people put the football bets on and perhaps kick the dog when they don't come in on the way out. I was always that person that thought one day I will be able to go in there. And so at 18, I was allowed in legally. And on my 18th birthday, I very much went in and, spent quite a substantial amount of money. But what also was lying in wait that I had not seen as a young lad is the FOBT machines and the roulette and the slots on there, in particular roulette. And I know on your podcast you've heard this many times, but they are really addictive in their design, in their appearance, in everything about them, really, to the person who is maybe, vulnerable to addiction. And for me, they opened up a whole new world of gambling. Although you still stood at a machine and gambling, it was just this whole new world, because whereas before on the fruit machines, I would win probably a maximum of £25 at a young age, or as it progressed, £50 and £100, but I was never able to win more than that. And FOBTs offered that chance, they offered the chance of £500 wins. And, seeing other people on them with £2,000 balances, £1,500 balances, but also seeing people shoveling money into them, it was the world that, it was scary, but it was exciting. And for me, I just opened up to this world and I just let myself go. And it provided two things for me. It provided the obvious gamble time that I craved, but it also provided an escape. I was doing two jobs at the time, working day and at night, as a cleaner at Sheffield Arena. And the thing with it is I was always tired through doing that. And when I was tired, I was grumpy. And when I was grumpy, I was in a bad mood. And when I was in a bad mood, I wanted to gamble. I wanted to escape. And the bookies sat there with the juicy beige lights dimmed, with the machines lighting up. It was almost like the door was opening for me and saying, "Come here, give me a big cuddle and come and play on these machines." And that's what it was like for me. And it just offered me that escape. And I began to develop a massive addiction to FOBT machines, a massive addiction to sports betting, which I was legally allowed to do at this stage. And as I will come on to, I'm sure, in a little bit, I had that whole situation, that whole sort of new dimension to gambling again when I found online gambling. But obviously we'll probably touch on that in a moment. But yeah, that's how it sort of developed for me. And when you've got the opportunity to win bigger, you've also got the opportunity to lose bigger amounts. For me, it was a regular pattern that to win big, I'd sort of risk big as well.
I can relate to so much of your story there, Kieron, especially when you spoke about being in a bad mood and being tired from work and such. Like gambling absolutely provides that escapism, and I could really relate to that. I'll just nip into the bookies. I'll load up my machine, or like you say, load up the online gambling and such like. So was it something that you were doing every day? Was it something that I'll stick with that question. Was it something that you were doing every day by this point?
I was doing it as often as I could do around work and around finances. So I was at that point doing it most days. most days I would be paying a visit to the bookmakers, be it with my money, my wife's money, or money that was laying around in the house. And I didn't live at home anymore. I lived with my wife's parents, and maybe I would find, because it was a house that was, it was full of people. Other people lived there, and maybe I'd find. I know it sounds daft, but the reason I'm mentioning this is just anything for a gamble. Maybe I'd find £2, £3. Didn't know it belonged to, but I know at that point it's gamble funds. So yeah, it was quite often. It was almost daily. Certainly, if I had a chance, it would have been daily. And eventually, I was in a position where, on the work situation, I had 30-minute dinner breaks. And I got it down to a T that if I leave my machine, I wasn't a lorry driver at this point. If I leave my machine, I can get in the car, travel to the Bookies, that's 10 minutes. I can then spend 10 minutes gambling, be it placing a bet on horses or football or roulette, and then 10 minutes back. And I got it, and I would literally do it, and I would be back on the machine inside 30 minutes, having just lost £80, £90, £50, but even £10, but they all add up. But the thing is that going to such lengths just to get that fix, it was almost getting to the stage where I couldn't get through a working day without, at very minimum, wanting to go and do that, but very often doing that. And I would not factor in that, even at that stage, I wouldn't factor in food, dinner time. And I'm a big lad. I'm a big lad, and I like my food. And it all was blown out of the window because gambling was far more important. And the frequency in which I did it was just getting more and more. And when you talk about sort of opportunities to gamble away from like the working side of things, I would quite often get paid cash.
I was just about to say, Kieron, would you get paid cash? Yeah.
I would get paid cash. It was a sort of old-fashioned company I worked for. Not cash in hand or anything. It was all legit, but it was old-fashioned methods of pay, which, I don't blame them. It's just the way they did things. But I would often get that on a Friday, and it was a massive, massive challenge for me because I would, pass probably 3 or 4 bookmakers in the journey home in the car. And it was such a big challenge to get home. If I arrived home at 5 p.m. on a Friday with my week's wages, I'd done really, really well. But the thing is, I would tell myself, if I did go to the bookies, and I'm sure this rings true with quite a lot of people who have struggled with gambling, that I'm going to just have £10. I'm just going to have £15, or whatever the number relative to your wages, But for me, I'm just going to have a tenner. I'm going to have £5. I'd have it all planned out. I'd be thinking about it from 9 a.m. in the morning. It's payday. I'm going to have, just for talking sakes, I'm going to have £4 on the scores for the football tomorrow. I'm going to put £6 on the roulette machine. If I win, great. If I don't, off I go. And £400 later, £300 later, whatever the amount, I walk out face on with a massive problem on my hands in explaining why I've just been to work for the whole week and not got anything to show for it. Not to mention the we can't pay car insurance, we can't pay this and that, to my wife. And, well, as, girlfriend back then, but it's so much of impact on the mental health even back then in them stages that I believe I should have sort of, if I could tell my former self back then something now, it would be to put barriers in place to stop that happening.
Mm.
Be it as simple as speaking to the company, get a bank transfer. I know they're old-fashioned, that's the way they do things. Can you make an exception? You know, I'm sure we'll touch on it later, but little things that could have been put in place back then that would have, you know, maybe I would have still found ways, but it would have at least cut the big ways off, you know. And it's, I remember going in with a week's wages, so just one that stands out. And I think I got a balance of £400 or £500. Either way, it was a big balance that I'd won.
Mm.
And as much as I discarded food on my dinner breaks, I made up for it when I got home. And I remember being so thrilled with this balance. I wanted a McDonald's on my way home from the Bookmakers because I was collecting the money. But I thought, as I was walking out, I thought, I'm going to get McDonald's. I want to get, you know, £10 worth or whatever for a big lad like me. But Bookies can pay for it.
Yeah.
And I remember with this 400 off, whatever, I think it was 400, but maybe £500 in my hand, what I'd just won, all profit. I remember trying to win £10 so the McDonald's can pay for it. So the Bookies can pay for the McDonald's, and you know what's coming. I lost the whole profit. I lost everything and my wages just for the sake of £10 that I could have took out the profit. Because I just wanted the Bookies to pay for me McDonald's.
Yeah.
It's the most expensive McDonald's, you know.
Yeah.
I could have brought 50 of them, you know, with the profits. And it's just, I touch on that because A, it stands out, but B, it's the mindset that I had back then.
Mm.
You know, the mindset of it, it's easy because I'd just had a big win, and that's quite dangerous. It really is quite underestimated how dangerous a big win can be.
Mm.
Because it gives you a false sense of it being easy to win. Even though you've been there and you've lost many times before, you've won big, and that's all you can think about.
Mm.
And because it's all you can think about, and you're buzzing, and everything else, it seems easy. And I thought it's you know, easy to win that extra £10. Yeah, I'll win an extra £10. I'll put £5 on red, double my money. You know, £400-500 later.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just one that stands out. I wanted to touch on, Alex. So
No, I appreciate that, Kieron. It's all. I mean, I think anyone listening to this who's played on fixed or betting terminals, played on the roulette machines, been in the bookies, it sounds all too familiar, doesn't it? I'll just put a £2 accumulator on. I've got my £10 note. I'll just put my bets on, deliberately knowing that you're going to have a bit of spare change to chuck in the machines. And it's just that excuse that you give yourself. And I can completely relate with the whole big win. You easily forget all those hours, all that money that you've spent just because you're chasing that big win. Because you know, every now and again, I can't remember, what was it, that famous experiment with I'm going to get this horribly wrong, maybe you can correct me, but it was I think, was it the mice with the cheese or whatever, was it Pavlova's dog or whatever? I can't remember, where they every now and again they give them a little reward, but for the rest of the time they're not getting anything.
yeah,
And it's just that,
Yeah,
it's that similarities. I think it's the experiment anyway. Hopefully,
yeah. Well, it makes a lot of sense because that's what I say. You know, you get that big win, and later on, as I'll come on to in a sec, you know, a massive win, winning the most amount of money that you've ever won. Again, it just leads into this false sense of it's easy.
Mm.
You know, it's going to happen again.
Mm.
And it may do, but then it may not.
Mm-hmm.
And at what cost? Both mentally and financially.
Well, I suppose actually that's quite a good place to touch on. I mean, I'm sure you probably got a lot of, I presume, like a lot of gamblers, you probably got lots of different tales and stuff, and maybe
Yeah.
we'll touch on them, and a little later. But what depths did it take you to, Kieron?
Yeah, so just from the bookmakers really, and I knew at that point I'd got a problem, and I remember breaking down, speaking to my grandmother, admitting to myself I'd got a problem with gambling. You know, I was upset, I was crying, and she said, "Go to Gamblers Anonymous," and that's when I found Gamblers Anonymous, and I went, and straight away, I'm a shy lad anyway, so I thought it's going to be full of people where I've got to stand up, make a fool of myself in my head, and it was nothing like that. People are all been through it. You know, I was welcomed in. I was asked if I want to go in a room with 2 people, and then just answered a few questions in a book. Spoke about a little bit about why I'm there, and then asked if I wanted to join the meeting for the second or for maybe next week, which I did, and I did 10 months gamble free straight off the bat, and then I went back gambling. We sort of get to 23, age 23 now. It's really starting to take a massive hold again. And I'm in a motorway services. I'm a lorry driver by this stage. And I smashed a window on a machine. And I thought, I'm going to end up in prison here. Mm-hmm. If I don't, I'm going to end up in some real, not just financial trouble, but with the law. And, despite my many negatives about me, I don't want to get on the wrong side at law. So I went to Gamblers Anonymous again, and I stopped for 2.5 years, which were fantastic. I stopped. I say I stopped. I abstained from gambling, but I didn't work on myself. I just abstained from gambling, and I think that's vital to work on yourself and change the way you're thinking, but also the things that you do, the barriers that are in place to guard against relapses. I didn't go to meetings much because I was working away from home, and my local meeting was midweek. So I get to a point where I've done 2.5 years, and then out of nowhere, I have a massive panic attack. And I believe that there was something wrong with my heart. I was hyperventilating. I thought I was having an heart attack. I wouldn't believe the doctors. Reality is, I've always had problems with mental health, like depression and anxiety, but I'd never had a panic attack, and this was my first one. And because I wouldn't believe the doctors, and I was convinced there was something wrong with me, and because I delayed grief, if you like, I was beginning to go downhill mentally really quickly. And I escaped. I escaped to gambling. I didn't have the necessary barriers in place to prevent that, in that I could get a loan, payday loan. I had access to my card. My wife was working, so I had time on my hands when I wasn't. And I had opportunity because I wasn't self-excluded from the bookies, and certainly not online. And that's a dangerous 3 things: time, money, and opportunity. So I returned to gambling, and this time I went to the place of online slots. And I always saw online slots as a quick way to lose money, even though I would lose in the bookmakers. I thought it was incredibly quick online. So I was always a bit skeptical, but I began to get more and more into it, and I started to watch casino streamers on YouTube, and I really started to focus on that side of me gambling. And the reason I'm saying all this is because it was the beginning of the real downturn in my gambling, in life in general, to be honest, but certainly in the gambling aspect. Because online slots offered an even bigger window of opportunity in terms of winning big. It was almost limitless as to what I could win. So we've started at bingo winning tokens, with them progressed to fruit machines winning £10, £5, £25, £50. Now we then go on to FOBTs at £500, online limitless. And it's such a dangerous world. On one spin of roulette, you're talking thousands of pounds in winnings that you can win. No cap on it, no tax on it. It's just such an exciting window of opportunity for people who are vulnerable to gambling addiction, but also excited by it, and excited by gambling. And I then, at that stage, really started to go downhill and started taking more and more payday loans. I remember one day running up £5,000 on my wife's name in payday loans. Luckily, we had my wife's father who bailed us out on that occasion, because we had nothing. We didn't have the money for me to gamble. But what happened as well is that indirectly, I saw that people would bail us out. And indirectly, I say indirectly, it was always at the back of the mind that people wouldn't see us on the streets, or so I thought. But homeless, But I never gambled, thinking that it's okay because people will always bail us out. It was sort of I gambled and then faced the consequences after. So yeah, we get to the stage now. I've rambled a little bit, but we get to the stage where things are starting to really go downhill. We're starting to end up in a lot of debt. These bailouts are not enough, from family and friends, in particular my wife's father. Not enough, because as much as people bail us out, I'm spending double. One payday loan paid back, that company's happy with us. They're only too happy to offer us more money now. I'm getting wages and I'm earning quite a good wage, but now my wife's in a position where she's got chronic pain and she's in and out of hospital because the only thing that would help it is morphine, and they wouldn't send her home with it. So why I say that is that she would often wake up screaming in pain and agony, and I couldn't do anything to help her. It was Oromorph or nothing that helped. And the reason I say this is because feeling so useless in not being able to help her, I escaped again. I escaped into that world. And whilst even sometimes the ambulance would come, I would be roulette spinning on my phone. And it's not that I didn't care, but in my mind I was escaping, but doing something for us, whereas I couldn't do anything for her. And I just escaped, ultimately. I mean, I'd have gambled anyway, but it had an impact. And we're sort of talking maybe 10 grand's worth of debt at this point. I'm talking figures, but they're not really important. Someone might have £500 worth of debt or no debt, but they've still got a massive problem. But I'm just saying, as my story goes, debts are starting to rack up. And it gets to the point then where we are just on one occasion, I lost £3,500 of our money, and my father in-law put money in to replace it the next day. And whilst my wife was asleep, I transferred the money out of her bank into mine and lost that. So he'd replaced the money we had lost, and I lost that as well. So £7,000 in 24 hours. On another occasion, I lost from £52 deposit. I could have walked away with £6,500, and we really, really, really needed it. And I was at £6,500. I was wanting 10, and I can guarantee if I got to 10, I'd have been wanting 20. And yeah, I lost, and they're just little spikes of memories, but the pendulum had truly swung in, and I was going downhill. I was taking my wife with me, and anyone that come across me, I was taking them down with me, unintentionally, of course, but as a result of my gambling addiction. So we get to the stage where, out of nowhere, I win big. I win big.
Crazy.
I win big, and I'm thinking at that stage, I don't want to talk figures too much, but I won 12,000, and I just saw that as easy then, despite all what I've just said about all the other times. And the thing is, because I won big, it offered that hope again. Just as I was giving up on gambling, I offered that hope. And I just began to go in free fall. I eventually made us homeless. We got evicted from his home. I caused us to fall out, my wife to fall out with her own father. Lost that contact. I caused a path of destruction, as I say, to anybody I come across. And ultimately, after losing a week's wages in September of 18, I was on a night shift. I got paid at 12 o'clock at night. Money went in the bank. My wife was sat up waiting the money in. And I was telling her, just wait while 9 o'clock in the morning. It's probably a problem with the bank. She knew probably deep down she weren't getting that money. And I just blew it, 4 hours, 5 hours. And I just went to a happy place of mine, and I just took a load of tablets, and I wanted out. And I say I wanted out. Did I want out, or did I want out? But ultimately, I didn't want to cause anyone this heartache anymore, this path of destruction that I was leaving. I wanted to punish myself, and that was to end it. And fortunately, I didn't take enough. And who knows what could have happened, but I didn't take enough, and it pains me, and I'm disgusted to say I still gambled after that. And it wasn't until 3 months later I managed to stop. And I managed to stop through going back to Gamblers Anonymous. In this time, I was still going to Gamblers Anonymous, but I was relapsing. I was relapsing weekly. They'd spend sometimes 1 hour of a 2-hour meeting talking to me. But then I would relapse, and something felt different on the time that I did manage to stop, the meeting that I did go to. Something felt different. It was now or it was never. It was going to be 3 things. It was 1 of 3. It was going to be prison, because I was getting into things that are not legal in order to get me gambling money. It was going to be death through suicide, or it was going to be I stopped gambling. Unfortunately, I stopped gambling on the 27th of December 2018. I walked into a GA room. I said, I've been gambling again, but I'm ready. I feel ready to stop. I'm going to stop. I feel this is something different in me. I am fed up. I am drained with gambling. I'm utterly consumed by gambling. But now I feel ready. And it just was a completely different feeling to any time before. And I knew it had to happen as well, because like I said, it was going to be prison or death. And ultimately, I managed to stop with the help and support of Gamblers Anonymous, Gam Care, counselling on phone. And also through doing lots of different things with barriers in place, putting barriers in place to stop me gambling, or even if temptation swung in hard on me, I wasn't able to gamble.
No, definitely. Kieron, that was really, for me, that was really quite tough to listen to, hearing about that story and that attempt on your own life. So what were you've spoken about the barriers that you put in place, you know, that you had that switch, that change where you went, this is my time, this is the time that it feels different this time. What, I know you've spoke about Gamblers Anonymous, Gam Care there and things, but can you talk us through, like, what has that journey been like? So from your last bet to sort of almost to now, what's that journey been like for you?
It's been a roller coaster, probably a bit cliche in talking about journeys, but it really has, because there's been so many, obviously, ups and downs. But the one thing that's been constant in that journey is that I've struggled with the guilt. The guilt of what I did. And to this day, 2 years and 2 months gamble free, I'm struggling with the guilt. And it's, in a way, I suppose it's a positive in one sense, because I don't just think what I did's okay. Not just financially, but mentally, what I did to people. My wife, who had to suffer all the lies, the deceit, if she asked me a question, if she asked me what colour sky is, I'd convince her it's green. Thinking on my feet when she caught me out and things like that. So all that mental torture that I put her through, and my family and friends through, I carried that guilt. So in that sense, it's been very much down. But the upside of it is that I always remember a few months in, I really, I had an opportunity, and it was a small window of opportunity. But again, a gambling addict, he'll take it, or she'll take it. If they really want to. And I'll just quickly point on this, because the reason I'm saying it is because the positive coming out of it is that this was a time when I just went away for one night with a friend to Scotland for work, and money was going into my wife's account that night. Some money was going in, and she gave me the card details over Facebook to pay for something on the PlayStation, so we could have as entertainment for night. I know it's probably going long way around it, but either way, there was a card details on the message, so I would make the purchase on the game, and that'd be it. But she fell asleep after that message, and I know at that time money was going in that night, and at this stage I'd not put GamStop in place, so I was still able to gamble online, certainly in her name. And I always remember when I'd done playing on the game and my friend was asleep, my wife was asleep, money was going in, everything lined up to be able to relapse and gamble. And I actually sat for 1 hour looking out the window, which just happened to be a coral opposite, And it was at night time, considering all my options, which there was two: I gamble or I don't. And I thought of all the negatives and everything, and all the positives that I get me fix, and I decided not to. After 1 hour, I picked up the phone to delete the message with the card details on. And as it happened, she'd already deleted the message. So I couldn't have done it anyway. But for that hour, I pondered, not knowing because I'd not looked at my phone. As far as I was concerned, everything lined up to gamble. I could have. And I decided not to. And you know what? The biggest positive that comes out of that, and that I've carried through my recovery, is that if I'd have gambled then, regardless of deleting message and being able to, as far as I was concerned, I was able to. If I'd have gambled then, I'd have gone to bed, having lost the money for the month, and I'd have woke up in the morning, and for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, I'd have been fine, absolutely fine. But then everything would have hit what I've done. I'd have remembered what I've done. I'd have been reminded of what I've done. And waking up that next morning without that on my head, thinking, what have I done? Where's the money gone? What we're going to do for money? We can't afford this. We may be homeless. You know, my wife, you know, she's okay. She's going to be going downhill and things. Just that positive in that has carried with me, you know. And whenever I've had thoughts where I thought I could do with having a bet, I thought about that. That waking up in the morning and not having to think, how am I going to explain this? Where are we going to get money from? And that's a massive, massive thing for me. Because I sat for 1 hour and thought about all the consequences. Whereas before, I'd worked on myself to get to that stage through going to Gamblers Anonymous for a few months. But before, I just gambled and then dealt with the consequences.
Do you think it was I don't know if you believe in this or not, but do you think it was a higher power at this point? Something greater than yourself?
I think each to their own on that. I certainly have my own beliefs, and I do sort of believe, but I do believe in God, but I just think that I'd worked on myself a little bit in this time going to Gamblers Anonymous, where I hadn't before. I just abstained from gambling. So I took advice in, I'd put things into place, and I'd sort of to work on me changing the way I think. And I was able to think clearer. So, yeah, maybe something played a part like that. But I think a lot of it was that I was beginning to see clearer and change and work on my recovery rather than just abstain.
So how were you able to change your thinking, would you say?
I think that one of the ways is certainly being able to, as much as I say I carry the guilt, and it brings, whenever I think about gambling, I carry, the guilt and the memories. I think, whereas before when I was gambling, it was a case of, like I've just said there, gamble and deal with the consequences after. When I was gambling, I was utterly consumed by gambling and everything to do with gambling, the addiction. I wasn't able to think clearly. When I went to Gamblers Anonymous at that stage, people would give me great advice or spoke to a counsellor, great advice, but I was clouded in my head, I was consumed by gambling. I'd wake up in the night, think about gambling. What I'm getting at is that when I stopped and it felt different, I was able to take on people's comments, advice and support and help. I was able to speak to counsellors on the phone. I was eventually able to think clearer. And being able to think clearer allowed me to then think about the consequences of doing it before I did it. Before, my head was so clouded, so messed up, that I wasn't able to do that. So that's one of the ways in which I was able to, stop myself doing it then, but also change the way I thought about gambling. And then there's other things like parking up what I did, but that doesn't mean to say I'm not going to feel guilty about it. But parking it up, and in particular going to Gamblers Anonymous, getting the date of my last bet, and I'm at that stage mentally at that point where I'm thinking I've got, say, I think it was 3 months under my belt at that stage. If I was to bet now, do I really want to have that? Could I cope mentally with having to start again? From, I've just done 3 months, and it becomes a big thing, that date, So that's just a couple of ways. But then I put barriers in place as we went forward, and I changed the way I think about spending my time. Instead of spending it thinking constantly how I can get money, break law, do this, that, and other, I began to find distractions, especially on tough days. Online gaming became a thing for me, not for everyone. But I met a community of people that I could talk to, not just about gambling addiction, but just in general. And while I was doing that, I certainly wasn't thinking about gambling. And, my local football club, Rotherham United Esports, have an online gaming team, and I found that, and it just really, really helped. And I know there's others out there. So barriers in place started to look at, like, not carrying money. I never carried money. I didn't have a bank account anymore, apart from one that was overdrawn that, they wouldn't let me close it because it was overdrawn. They wanted the money and we couldn't afford to give them the money. But eventually we sorted that out. So then I self-excluded from the bookmakers. I come across GamStop and Gamban, which is the software that stops you getting on betting websites. But GamStop, for anyone who doesn't know, any of your listeners, is, I'm sure they're aware, but if you don't, it's an online tool where you fill in your details, and you're blocked from signing up with any UK registered casino under the UK gambling commission. And for me, that's a massive, massive, massive tool for people who are gambling online, especially, and struggling. And I signed up to that, both in my name and my wife's name. And that was another barrier against gambling addiction. And I put these barriers in place, so I made it near impossible to gamble, even if I was having a really high temptations. Certainly didn't carry money, as I said, and just little things that I put in place that I've not fully done before. I always left a little window of opportunity before, but this time I didn't, and it was because I was able to think clearer, think about the consequences, and ultimately put barriers in place to guard against, even if I do have a slip in my mentally strong state at that point, against gambling.
That's absolutely brilliant, Kieron. I'm sure a lot of the listeners will benefit from that advice. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant that, here you are, like 2018. So let me get my dates right. So what date was it you said in 2018?
27th of December, 2018.
So that's, I'm showing myself up here. That's not quite, but almost coming up to 3 years, right? Or it's just been 2, but it's going to be coming up to 3 years.
Yeah, well, in December this year it'll be 3 years. So
it'll be 3 years.
I've done 2 years and coming up to 2 months.
Yeah.
And like I said, you know, I've done 2.5 years before, but
Yeah.
I didn't do anything about me. I just stopped gambling.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't have barriers in place. I know I mentioned barriers a lot, but they are massive in helping your recovery. If indeed you are at a stage where you want to stop gambling, and even if you want to stop gambling for a short period of time, months, just have a big break, putting barriers in place. They don't do that anymore. In fact, they help that. So I stopped for 2.5 years without putting barriers in place, without working on myself. And before you know it, I have a mental breakdown. Things are going wrong in my life and I want that escape again. And I did.
Yeah. So Kieron, so tell us more about your YouTube channel, because that's clearly something that, you've been filling your time with and being able to, to kind of commit time to and energy. For anyone that's not seen it, it is a fantastic channel. Kieron's got lots of guest interviews, a former professional footballer, and many other interviews as well. It's a really good channel, and I've certainly enjoyed watching the videos. Sorry to sort of blow smoke, Kieron. Sorry, but I really do think it's fantastic. And tell us more. How did it start? What are your plans, etc., etc.?
Yeah. So again, over my life, I've been very, very selfish, and I've always wanted to give back when I felt I could, mentally strong enough to give back, in terms of helping people with addiction. Now, I never claim in any of my videos to be an expert or a counsellor, but what I have done is lived and been at the very depths of what gambling addiction in particular, as much as I cover any addiction and mental health, but gambling addiction in particular, have extensive, bad, negative, true depths of that addiction experience. And I felt that I don't want anyone, it will happen, but I don't want anyone to feel the way I did and to do what I did. And I just felt that I could do something. And I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew I always wanted to create a YouTube channel, doing something, whether that be just gaming or whatever. But I thought, why not create a gambling channel? A channel where I can talk about my gambling addiction, but also give a platform for other people to talk about theirs. Not just gambling addiction, alcohol, whatever, drugs, sex, whatever addiction it is, or mental health issues. But because I think there's something so powerful, and I think this is why Gamblers Anonymous and Alcohol Anonymous and things, it works so well, is because when you hear someone tell their story and listen to the things that they did, and you can relate to that, the very minimum that you take from that is that you don't feel alone. And I don't want people to feel alone. It's an awful place to be. And if you're already in a place where things is becoming too much and you're having thoughts you really shouldn't be having, just knowing that you're not alone. And if someone in that place sees these videos and these interviews and such as this podcast, it can make the world of difference. And that's what I wanted to do. And obviously, I say obviously, I'm 30-year-old, but I'm not really massive on my tech. I didn't know how to edit videos. I had no idea. But I got some help in getting started in terms of equipment, by very generous people, who just wanted to help as well. And I took that and I learned myself how to edit videos, which I'm still learning now. and I can see a steady improvement. But I'm very basic, and I just put videos out there, and I talk on certain subjects, which I think I can speak from with experience and pass on knowledge, experience, and just little pointers, and people can take them, or they can leave them, or they can maybe do a bit of both. But at a very minimum, me speaking about it, they won't feel alone, hopefully. And the more people, such as yourself, Alex, who's doing this, talking about the addiction, whether it's somebody who's been there or from the industry or whatever, it's all, in my mind, bringing about the awareness, in particular with gambling addiction, and it can only be a good thing. And that's why, again, I thought I want to go on YouTube. I want to do YouTube, and I'm not here to make money. I've got 114 subscribers. I think I'm a long way off making money from it, and but it's not about that for me. It really is genuinely just to share my thoughts, interview people who've been through it, and hopefully help others in doing so.
It's absolutely brilliant. Kieron, I've got one final question. Are you okay for time?
I am, yeah.
Brilliant. So reflecting back, what advice would you give a young Kieron?
I would. It's difficult to say in a straightforward way, but certainly I would look at a young Kieron and say, be careful. It's quite obvious, probably, but be very, very careful of these bright lights. Be very careful of these windows of opportunity to gamble. But what I would also say is, and I think more importantly, in my opinion, is a very young Kieron. Why isn't there enough education out there for little Kieron? Why ain't there enough education on the depths and the very dangers of gambling addiction? And I'm not saying there's no education at all out there, but there's certainly not enough education out there for younger people with gambling. And at that point, maybe if I ignored that education, which, kids are kids, I would say listen to it. But for me, certainly when I was younger, there wasn't that. And I think it can be a whole lot better now. And so, yeah, I would say be very, very careful about what I'm doing. And parents as well, really, I would urge them to sort of guard the children against what addiction can do, and maybe put limits in play. I know it sounds extreme, but if a child's showing a tendency towards gambling at an early age, like I did, and they're doing certain things like spending time watching someone on a machine rather than spending time, just little signs, pick up on signs. But again, that goes back to education for the child and for the parents. Then I think the whole bigger picture is education. For every person who struggles with gambling, I'm sure there's thousands who don't, and gamble responsibly, and that's great. It's a form of entertainment to a lot of people. But as much advertising as there is out there for gambling, and as much as it's shoved in his face in every newspaper you read, online article you read, football match you watch, football shirt sponsors that kids love football, there's certainly nowhere near the level of education about the dangers. And I think there just needs more people going into schools, going into football clubs, rugby clubs, whatever, sports clubs, going into even, working with gambling industry to educate, and using social media as a vehicle as well to do that, and not just YouTube, because obviously casino streamers and things, they get large amounts of views. if you look at gambling addiction, you know, as much as I'm not in it for money and views and things like that, it doesn't get a lot. And even the bigger channels, they don't get a whole lot of views. But why? And again, does it go back to education? Does it go back to awareness? Some companies are doing great things, but for me, not enough. So, in a long-winded answer to your question, Alex, what would I say to a younger Kieron is, what would that younger Kieron say? Please educate and help me. Please educate and help me avoid what's ahead of me.
Kieron, I think that is an amazing place to finish. Thank you so much for coming on the Invisible Addiction podcast and sharing your story. It's been awesome. Where can people find you?
So I'm on Twitter at Addiction Chance. I'm also available to contact on Twitter under key_147. But also, if you want to check out my channel, again, it's just my experiences and other people's interviews. It's Second Chance Addiction.
Fantastic. Right, Kieron, thank you so much. And yeah, I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, brilliant. Cheers, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I don't know about you, but I could relate a lot to Kieron's story. Did you start gambling in your childhood on those machines at the arcades? Did you have family members that liked to gamble as well? Were you lucky to keep hold of your wages after payday? Have you experienced a relapse? Let me know. Let's start a conversation. Feel free to drop us a comment on YouTube, message on social media, or get in touch with me confidentially via email, info@theinvisibleaddiction.com. In the next episode, I'll be speaking to several women who are using their experiences to help prevent gambling-related harm. Really looking forward to that one. Finally, I'd like to say a massive thank you to the sponsors of this episode, TalkBan Stop, which is a partnership between GamCare, GamBan and GamStop that combines practical tools with support to help you stop gambling and kickstart your recovery journey. It all starts with a chat. In the meantime, thanks once again, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.